We are talking about the Catholic Church and challenges facing it now in the 21st century. And to give us another perspective, we're joined by three men who have served the church but don't believe that change necessarily is the order of the day. Let's bring in now our guest. Joining us now, Father Gerald Murray, pastor of St. Vincent de Paul in New York City. He's a canon lawyer and a former chaplain in the U.S. Naval Reserve. Also joining us, Father Mark Valancourt. Father Valancourt is the president and principal of Kennedy Catholic High School in Lower Hudson Valley. And Father Valancourt has traveled to the Vatican with Archbishop Timothy Dolan when Dolan was elevated to cardinal. And we also have with us Father John Pitteret, whose parish, St. Anthony's in the Bronx. And the father is the former president of Loyola University. He taught economics at Fordham University for 12 years. Gentlemen, thank you all. I appreciate the time. Well, let me start with a question I've asked a lot of folks. What's the health right now of the Catholic Church? Father, I'll start with you.
Well, you know, I look at the church as a global reality, especially when you mentioned at the introduction I was in Rome with His Eminence Cardinal Dolan. You get a real sense of the universality of the church. From that perspective, the church is strong. The church embraces all the time zones, every language of the world. Certainly, when we look at the almost 2,000-year tradition of the church, how she started from a small movement in Galilee to now completely enwrapping the globe, you have to realize that she is a phenomenally dynamic structure. And so for me, the church is strong. When you take that question, you step back and say, how is the church doing in certain areas of the world? Well, then you're going to get a different answer. Some places strong, yes. Other places, no.
Well, let's talk about health, Father Murray, in the U.S. If we focus right now on our own country, what is the health of the church here?
Here in the United States, in comparison with where we were, let's take the year 1960 as a benchmark, statistically we're in trouble. We have lost mass attendance, sacramental participation, baptisms, marriages. The number of priests has declined precipitously, and the number of seminarians is down. So we have to face the reality that the church, which is still very important and very vibrant in the U.S. in so many ways, is not at the level which it was at 50 years ago. The reason for that we can discuss, but are there possibilities for renewal? Absolutely. Otherwise, none of us here would be functioning as priests in a happy way. We all are. We love being priests and we love serving the church, but we have to find out what went wrong and how can we counter it.
You agree?
I do. All I would add is that to me the biggest single factor affecting American Catholicism, and we're working through it now, is that we don't have the religious women anymore, or that we have very few numbers of them. But at any given time over the past 100 years, sisters outnumbered priests by a factor of 3 to 1. They were the ones who formed the Catholic culture in the United States. They're the ones that they did it in the schools, in religious education. They're the ones who fostered vocations. They were constantly asking young boys, now, have you ever thought about becoming a priest? So we don't have that now. God willing, that will come back at some point, because I do think the young women are still called by the Holy Spirit, and we have to find the right ways in which they can flourish in the church. But I think that is a very big adjustment, and we have lots of lay people now doing what the religious sisters were doing before, but it's still a big adjustment.
Well, let me use that as our first launching off point, because the sisters right now and the discussion right now is the latest debate du jour within the church. And I got to tell you, I'll do the laity perspective here. I can't find a single person who thinks the Vatican, given the priorities and the challenges that the church faces right now, ought to be picking a fight with the sisters. And we have spoken to dozens of nuns in our area who do some of the most thankless work. And the idea that they're being targeted because, and talked about obeyance, etc., and you know the challenges right now that they're vocalizing, they're not going quietly into the good night. Is this really a fight the church needs to have right now?
I would say it's, for a technical reason, it's an important fight. You could take your argument just a little bit further and say, look, this group of sisters with the LCWR is, they are more liberal. There's nothing wrong with being more liberal. But they're also not attracting any vocations, they're going to die out. So why not let them die out? That's an argument that's been made. And I would counter that by saying, well, the difficulty is that a lot of people have donated to these different sisters groups over time. And we've now seen this happen where, like, they close the Catholic hospital, a foundation is set up, it has to be used for similar purposes, and the money is given away according to law, everything properly done. And none of it is given to any Catholic group. None of it. And the Vatican says, you know, this is unjust to the people who donated the money. And it said the Vatican doesn't want the money, they're not going to get the money. But it said that we have to protect.
But you know, the principal argument for why, at least the laity was explaining that the Vatican got in this fight, was that there was politicization going on the part of the nuns that weren't in keeping with the teachings or the policies of the church, and there wanted to be more adherence. And I don't know, I'm positive that there are some progressive nuns who are taking positions that aren't in keeping with the church's teachings, but the vast majority of sisters, and you guys know them, you deal with them on a daily basis, but the ones that I know, they're not preaching politics, they're dealing with feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, and doing the mission that you guys do as well. And it just seems to me to have nuns be the target right now and have very little support from the laity as them as a target right now, with everything facing our church, it's not the right use of time, let alone the right target here to go after. You guys disagree?
I disagree, because this study by the Vatican has been exhaustive. It's gone on for, 10 years. The issue is not nuns in general. The issue is this group, which is the leadership of various groups of nuns. But there's another group, which the Vatican has no problems with, another leadership group that's faithful. This group is promoting subversive doctrines. They're kind of undermining Catholic teaching, and in the process betraying the mission that they signed up for. Now, this has been observed not only in this group, but sociologically this happens often.
We can't, though, with all due respect, Father, make this group some marginal tiny sect. 80% of the nuns are part of the LCWR, and they're going out to St. Louis right now, and they're speaking with one voice, it seems. I'm sure there's not unanimity, but it's not some tiny little fringe.
As Father said, these groups are largely older sisters. They're not getting vocations. The young dynamic groups, such as Mother Teresa of Calcutta's sisters, they belong to another organization that gathers together superiors. In the end, numbers don't really matter. If Jesus taught that the church speaks for him, then we listen to the church. And if the church is going to correct us, our reaction shouldn't be stay away from us. The reaction is, well, are we betraying the mission? Tell us. You know, truth in advertising, that's a big thing in the secular world. Same thing, if you go to a religious institution, you should get religion, not deviation.
Father, one of the nuns, and I think the line spoke for many, says, we make our vows, but our obedience isn't blind. And there's been the argument, wait a minute, after all the abuse scandal that is still fresh in this church right now, that this is a line in the sand that the Vatican is choosing to target, and this population that they're going to go after. And certainly they look the other way on a lot of other stuff that we all regret that they did, but now they're drawing the line in the sand on the sisters. You must hear this. I mean, I'm not speaking in a vacuum right now. It's not just the editorial pages, it's the laity who aren't crazy about going after the nuns here. And I know you three aren't leading the charge, but I'm asking, do you understand the frustration from a lot of folks on Sunday saying, what are we doing here?
You know, I come from a high school which was founded by a religious order, Sisters of Divine Compassion. I've seen generations of alum come back telling stories about the sisters who taught them, taught how they were educated, their experience in the school. There's a lot of fondness there. And that's real, that's legitimate, and that's something which, as Father was saying at the beginning, did tremendous work in fostering the faith. But I think what we're talking about here, if we want to get to a theology of reform, or getting back to our roots, especially any religious order, has to be faithful to their foundress, for female religious, their apostolic mission. And all of that has to come together within the core of what we believe in our faith, the rule of faith. You know, you talk about obedience. The obedience of faith means I give assent of mind and heart to what the church professes and believes and teaches and preaches. That's at the core. I think community outreach, anything you can do to improve society, that's secondary. Good, yes, but really all of us, especially consecrated religious and priests, we really have to more than anyone else, be committed to the faith and what the faith says and what it calls us to do and how to live. And if an order has varied from that, I think it's part of, the See of St. Peter, someone who's the vicar of Christ, to go ahead and exercise what we would say oversight over the church.
But the Vatican is not even going against individual orders. As you pointed out, Father Murray, they're going after this leadership group. They're not going after all the nuns who are represented by this leadership group. They're saying, we're just looking at your conferences, your presentations, and things like that. They don't seem to be supporting the church. And on some big things like abortion, you're quiet. You say nothing. And then you invite some people who speak against it. So, suppose there were a group of pastors, who were tepid on abortion, that were promoting gay marriage. And you say, well, hold it, guys. That's way out of line. You can't be doing that.
Well, let me ask you, on Sunday, do you think the pews aren't filled as much? I know there's a variety of reasons, but in part because a lot of times when people go to church, they just want to hear Word of God and they want to go off the book. And so often it feels like we're getting a political message in church. Nobody expects the Vatican to be pro-choice or to all of a sudden take the pro-death penalty position or change its core things. But it seems that there's a lot of politicization going on from the pulpit, and at times it's like, wait a minute. There's also the thing that we're looking out for the most needy, which I know you guys do in everyday walk of life, but you don't hear about condemnation of cuts in social programs or everything else from there. Why is politics part of Sunday? And I count the issue of getting into a debate about abortion from a pro-life or pro-choice. Why does that have any place on Sunday?
But wait, that's not politics. That's human life. That's the basic philosophy. Who are we? Do we have a right to live? Does the government have a right to take our life or authorize other people to do it?
But doesn't it have too big of a part on Sunday?
Not at all. I would say we don't hear an anti-abortion sermon every Sunday. No, from most of my experience in my parish, and I've been in different parishes, priest for 27 years, most sermons have to do with the gospel of the day. Now, the question is, why aren't people coming to hear it? You asked an interesting question. We have less people at Mass. That is a variety of factors, and perhaps the preaching has to improve, but I don't think we're having people stay away from church because they're tired of hearing sermons about what the government needs to do. You know what? Now we need more of those because the government is taking aggressive steps to restrict not only our freedom, the freedom of every religious person. And in that case, please, let's have some more sermons on that.
You've seen, I assume you guys have seen some of the polls, that since the abuse scandal broke, more than 70-odd% of the American Catholic population doesn't take the word from the Vatican as directly as it may have before. There's a doubt and there's a questioning of leadership like there wasn't before. How does the church bridge that divide and get back that trust? And how much of an issue is that right now when it's the connection between the laity and the person at the front of the church?
Well, I think that you have to make a distinction in all these polls. If they break it down and you look at the people who are coming to Mass regularly, the percentage of people agreeing with the church on the different social issues and moral issues that you said is very high. And
but
so,
if I can interrupt for one second,
go ahead.
Father.
Go ahead.
Church talks about contraception.
Mm-hmm.
You poll the American laity, okay? About 90% of the Catholic population believes in birth control. And by the way, even at parochial schools, which now aren't always being taught by priests and nuns, but the majority of them, vast majority of them also believe in it, even though hopefully they're not talking about it in the classroom. My point is, there's a disconnect between what the Vatican draws as a line and what the laity, whether we like it or not, what they believe as well at home. And again, contraception seems to be the most recent example.
That is a good example of where we haven't really done very good instruction on it, I think. But that doesn't mean the Vatican should back away from it, nor should we back away from it. And by the way, that has all sorts of implication for young teenage, young girls and young boys and their activities. And there's lots of data on the availability of this leading to more promiscuity, not less, and more unwanted pregnancies, not fewer. So I don't think that That is an issue. I will grant you that's an issue. It's an issue on which most of the Catholics in the United States do not agree with it. But that's, I would say, our priest's failure to speak directly and persuasively to that.
But doesn't it come back to the bigger point that for people to show up in bigger numbers, which we all want on Sundays, not that the church has to modernize, which I know that's not what the church is going to do or arguably even should do, but the questions of relevancy that you guys must struggle with as well, to get the younger population to say, listen, our message applies whether you're 90 or 19 here, and we get it. If they feel that the church doesn't get it, and that they read the headlines that they're going after the nuns here, and then there is a risk. I want my church to succeed. I want it to be healthy. I read a number here that in 2020, which is 8 years from now, there'll be more priests over the age of 70 than those under it. And that we're going to have 30,000 total priests by that age. You know how many parishes there are, and I can imagine how many miles you guys got to log on Sundays to get to enough of them. We can't keep this up.
Right.
Relevancy's got to be addressed here. Am I wrong?
I think relevancy is not the issue, if I can be bold and say the issue is authenticity. Jesus and his message coming through. And therefore, as Father Pitter has said, the greatest witness in the United States for so long was religious nuns. And they loved Jesus, and that was the message you got. I never heard a nun talking about political issues when I was a kid, or contradicting the Pope, or saying women should be priests, or it's okay to sleep together before marriage. All that stuff became commonplace after the 70s. That's why the Vatican stepped in. Authenticity, though, takes time. You can't do it overnight. It means beautiful worship. It means serious effort at education. And it means, for the priesthood, recruiting candidates in homes and families. And that takes a long time. No easy answer, but on the other hand, there is an answer.
Well, speak to that last part, because you guys have known each other for a while now, haven't you?
Oh,
Sure.
yes.
Oh, yeah.
When you guys were in the seminary, you had a class of 12, do I have it right?
No, I was 12.
I
You
had
were
20
He was
in my
ahead of
class.
me.
20.
He was ahead of me.
Same place right now.
Yeah.
The last seminary that's left, class of 1. Why do you think?
Well, we were both ordained by John Cardinal O'Connor. Now, if you want to go back in the archives and listen to what he preached about, pro-life was at the top. I think when he spoke about the sanctity of human life, the right to life, his favorite phrase was being countercultural. So you use the word relevance a lot. Cardinal O'Connor would use countercultural, which means you need a voice that's right even when the rest of the world is wrong. And that's really what part of the dynamic of a young man who wants to belong to something that has a certain esprit de corps, is really giving my life to something which I believe is higher and above. Certainly a lot of other good vocations and things that you can do with your life are fine, but I know for me as a priest, to be a companion with Christ, to spread the gospel, to take the good work of building up the church, and certainly to latch on to a message which is true, which not necessarily the world agrees.
Did you guys lose anybody that was in the seminary with you that decided before they got ordained it wasn't for them?
Oh, yeah. And actually, that's part of what we call vocational discernment in the seminary, because it's not an easy life from the point of view of many things. On the other hand, if you live it well, it becomes quite easy in the sense that you enjoy it, you find great joy in it. I mean, for me, baptizing kids, giving First Communion to kids is very rewarding. And I say, well, it'd be nice to be married to a family. I said, no. Jesus and the apostles, I'm following their footsteps.
Do you think, though, if you did want to get married, you'd be any less of a priest?
Well, I couldn't. It wouldn't happen, number one, and I don't feel that way because I knew I freely gave it up. This is probably one of the biggest countercultural indicators in the Catholic Church: celibacy of the clergy.
Yep.
Since sex has become the center of cultural expression, priests who avoid sex for the love of God are somehow viewed as threats, and it's very true. On the other hand, most
if
people.
If somebody says that, I would take issue with them because, first of all, what always bothered me most about the abuse scandal was it allowed the vast, vast majority of priests who do thankless work that I don't think the majority of the population knows about, takes the vow of poverty and everything else, and it let them get painted with the same broad brush. And I thought that was one of the many tragedies outside, obviously, of the victims.
Agreed.
But for me, well, you guys know the history. I don't know if the public does. Priests used to be able to be married in our church up until the 12th century.
No,
We also know loopholes, guys. Time out.
Well,
Greek Orthodox Church, Greek Orthodox priests can
Absolutely.
be married with kids, and then all of a sudden they can be priests in the Catholic Church as well. I'm only saying this because it's not without precedent that somebody has got a wife and kids and can still be at the front of church on Sunday.
That in Latin Christianity, that's the exception for the vast majority of the history.
Fair
of
enough,
it,
and I'm not
okay?
debating
Sure,
that, but it's
okay.
still, it's an exception though with a bit of precedent, and I'll bring you in. Are we disqualifying people that would follow Scripture, would be just as devoted to the church and to their parishioners if they had a wife and kids?
Yes, we are, but we're doing it for a reason. And by the way, if you look at some of the other Protestant groups and the Jewish groups, they have the same problem with getting ministers. So don't think that marriage is going to solve that problem.
I think it's a little bit more acute, though, in the Catholic Church in terms of the numbers.
Well,
the drop
because
off from
our
where it was
numbers
to where we
are much higher. But let me go back to that, because I think that's, I don't want to gloss over the issue of getting people into the church, okay, on Sundays, attracting them. We had a system, and the nuns were part of this, but the priests were too, but we had a system where we told people, we gave them a little narrative, and we said why it's important to come to church on Sunday, and what the benefit is of this and what the norm is. And our little narrative, norm, and benefit was, look, you either go to church on Sunday or you go to hell. Okay? It was very simple. And you said, well, okay, given that choice, I'm going to go to church on Sunday. I'm not for reintroducing that narrative. But it was a short, convincing narrative that we spoke to everybody. I would say we don't really have a narrative now. We don't have a narrative, or I should say, it's not that no narrative exists. We don't constantly remind people why are you coming to church? What's the benefit that you get from this? And the norm is every Sunday. And we know that we don't have this because we look around our churches and people will skip Mass and then not worry about going to confession at all. You know?
Well, I will tell you, for me, what drives me nuts is the guys who come on Easter and Christmas, and I can't get a seat in the pew because I'm not showing up a half an hour early. And I'm like, where are you, in May and August and everything else? But when I say, why are you the twice-a-year guy? And these are friends. They'll say, I don't get anything out of it when I go. And I can disagree, but does the church have a responsibility, or is it going actually the other way to say, listen, if you don't think you're getting something out of it, we don't want you here? Because that's kind of in a more prettified language, some of the messaging that seems to be go out, which is either you are fully committed and fully in, or you're not a part of this. I think that's personally a dangerous message, but a lot of people seem to be getting that directly or indirectly, that the church is going to double down on conservative beliefs, and if you're not on board with it, go somewhere else.
A smaller church, but a more faithful church. I've heard that narrative.
I don't think that's good.
I have not. I'm not saying it is, but whatever we do, we've got to be faithful to the tradition. A lot of this, when we talk about conservative, liberal, these are really popular, distinctions in our culture today when we're talking about various issues. But really, when you go back and you look at the heart of the church, it's about what has been handed down. What is the rule of faith? What do we really believe? Those are the things you can never compromise. There's a certain level of an absolute with the Apostles' Creed, which we say every Sunday. I believe. And as you go line for line, it's not up for debate. It's not really something where, I can take out stanzas 3, 5, and 6, and I'm okay with the rest. It's a certain holistic, what we would say, doctrine that all of us as Catholics are called to embrace, which then, it works its way into every avenue of life, whether it's morality, it's how we live our life, how we deal with ourselves in the public square. It's a debate that we have in the halls of Congress. That's relevance. That's vibrant. And I believe a faithful Catholic man who is fed on the body and blood of his Lord every Sunday, when he goes to Holy Communion, is able to, pray in a household of faith with other people who believe. If you were to poll that group, you're not going to get a pretty wide disparity of beliefs.
But it's a shrinking group, and I guess what I would say is, the church is healthier when it has bigger numbers, and there's a population that I think would show up on Sundays. I'm not sure of this, obviously, but I think would, if they thought they were more welcomed, if they didn't agree with everything. I may not agree with everything, but I'm there. But I find myself to be more of the minority than the majority of people who say, if I'm not fully in, they don't really want me there.
Well,
All right, but look, to me there's one, and we all know this. We've gone 2 generations now without real Catholic catechesis, instruction, religious education. So what happens in many parishes, more in the city than in the suburbs, but what happens in many ones, that we insist that the children come to Mass on Sunday. Then they have to get something signed afterwards, okay? If they're preparing for the sacraments. They have to come. The parents drop them off at church. They go shopping. They come back and they pick them up after Mass or after Mass and instruction. And you say, well, there's no possible way that can work, because the child knows that going to Mass is a child's thing. It's not an adult thing. I don't do that in my adult life. That's what the parents are communicating to them, no matter how good the catechist is. Because of that situation, you have to work with people who are committed to the faith. So yes, it looks like we're doubling down on those who are more conservative. We're doubling down on those who are coming to church. We have to build from them out. In the parish where I am in the Bronx, there are about 500 people who come to Mass all together on Sunday. There are thousands of Catholics, thousands living within 6 blocks of the church. Forget about whether they come on Ash Wednesday, Palm Sunday, Easter Sunday. They don't come at all. Not at all. And so, just making things more inviting for them, I really don't think we should always be inviting. I don't think that's a strategy that's going to bring them in.
Well, one of the ways was you had parochial schools as feeder systems for lifelong Catholics, and they wanted their kids to go, etc. I'm biased. I got a couple kids in parochial school, and I happen to think you got some of the best kids that come out of there with a thing called humility, which is in overabundance now. But my gosh, I don't have to educate the 3 of you. How many schools have closed here, and how many more could even be slated for closure? And there's even more changes. I won't bore the audience with the details now in terms of, that there's going to be oversight of parochial schools that used to run themselves, or whatever.
Right.
How is that one of the consequences of the abuse scandal that people don't realize? Parochial schools never made money, but the church always found them to be a really important investment. And now it doesn't have the wherewithal to do that anymore. And as a consequence, you're going to lose not a whole generation of kids, but a lot of people. If you go through that, the odds are you're going to stay with the church. A lot of kids that won't go through that anymore. And you guys are in areas where it's, not just the school, but it's a savior for these kids. What happens as more and more schools close down? What will the consequence be? Just take this archdiocese. What's it going to be long term?
Well, I run a school.
Yeah, he knows.
So it's running a small business. It's something where I have to take what I have created within the walls and draw the community in. What do I mean? It means you have a product. It's a culture. It's a Catholic culture. It's quality education. It's faith-based, and it's also value-based. If you want to say what separates me, I have a government-run monopoly that right down the street, which is called the public school system. And everybody has to go to school. And they have huge amounts of funding and revenue. So what's going to make someone pay the extra money, which is the differential in the tuition on top of very steep property taxes, to come to my school? Well, I've got to give them first God. I've got to give them a culture. I've got to give them this whole environment of Christian respect. I've got to give them a future, which is 98% of our kids, 99% go on to college and live very productive lives. I've got to touch their lives, what I consider the most formative, the most vulnerable years of their life. Think about your life. What 4 years stand out more than your high school years? And so when you talk about that, I believe in it. I believe in what I do. I know that we have a very viable, what I would say, product or mission, apostolic
You're
outreach.
preaching to the choir here, Father. I'm saying, what do we do about all the schools that are getting shuttered down here?
Well,
and it's not one or two. There's a real consequence. And you guys might not say it, but that's one of the things, in addition to the victims, that makes me so mad about how the Vatican handled the abuse scandal. $2.5 billion estimated that had to be paid out. And if it's with funds that were raised on the side, those funds could have gone to keeping these schools open. So you don't have to convince me the value of the schools. I'm with you before you even went. I'm saying, what are we going to do? We can't keep closing these schools.
Well, the only answer is money. I hate to say it because it's true. I run a parish. It's also a small business in the sense of I have employees and I have utility costs and I have building maintenance. If we had unlimited funds, we could have parochial schools in every single parish. We could have adequately trained teachers and a great experience. We don't have that. The system, as you may remember, was based on contributed services from nuns. So therefore, the operating expenses were not as high as they became with salary teachers. Plus, when you had large mass attendance in the past, collections of parishes were greater. You could support the schools. Money is, temporality, as we call it in the church. Money is extremely important. In the Acts of the Apostles, it talks about taking up a collection to support the church in Jerusalem. St. Paul worked so he wouldn't have to take up collections to support himself. It's part of the reality. Now, where there is vibrant faith, money is there. I was meeting a pastor from Texas the other day. He takes in about $20,000 to $30,000 a week in his parish in the collections. I almost fell over. My goodness. Why? He's got thousands of people coming to Mass. Where there is faith lived, money is available. But
I would grant you that, you've put your finger on something which is neuralgic, unfortunately, in the church, the Catholic Church now. I would point it very bluntly, we no longer have a model of Catholic schooling that works. We have individual Catholic schools that work, and we will always have some individual Catholic schools. We do not have a model that works anymore. And it's going to be very difficult to identify how to move forward so that we get more face time with a greater number of students. You may not know this, only 12% of all Catholic children are now educated in Catholic schools. So that number is going to go, it's not falling precipitously, but it's moving smaller. It'll go to 10, 9, 8 on the thing. So you're right. If we want to really educate, we always should have an elite education for those who we hope will be leaders in the church. But there has to be a general education too, with the opportunity for leadership among those. And all we have right now is religious education. And most pastors understand that an hour and a half a week is, and many times without participation in the sacraments, is not a basis for an adult faith, building the foundation for an adult faith. So I would say that's an enormous challenge.
Plus, as one father told me, he goes, you don't find a better recruiting place than parochial schools if you want people to come into the order. Guys, it talks about the dollars and cents and obviously the open wound that the abuse scandal had, but how much is it still a stain in that, I said it before, people who aren't either practicing or aren't close, that don't have relationships with priests, they'll still do a wide swath here. You have people saying, well, I don't want to hear the moral authority of the Vatican telling me after what they did and after the thousands and thousands of children that were abused. Where are we now? And if you give free advice, I know there's been apologies, and obviously there's been billions of dollars in payouts, but is there more that needs to be addressed or acknowledged? Because I know a lot of people who say, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it from the Vatican after everything that happened. And obviously, if the Vatican is going to be taking a position of authority on moral issues, it has to be taken seriously. It's a tough question, but where are we right now with the scandal? I know safeguards are in place, so I'm not really asking that children are more vulnerable, because I think we've seen those safety procedures put in place, but in addressing what is still an open wound for the church.
Well, I believe that if we had done due diligence and we had been very strict oversight, certainly at the Episcopal level, meaning the bishops, nobody would have this vast lack of confidence and trust that has gotten to this point. So, you know, the first black eye was the fact that those who had oversight over these dioceses, you know, let this go by. And certainly when you see what's going on, you can look at the Philadelphia case,
Yep.
et cetera, it's going to be an issue that's not going to go away. However, on the other side, I think what we have, the leadership in the United States is completely reformed on this issue. They understand that you can't do certain things the way they used to do it. Certain treatments and certain policies they had were inadequate. And it's like anything, if the old playbook didn't work, you have to find a new one. Does that mean that they were all culpable at a criminal level? I don't believe so, as far as their oversight goes. Some of them, I think, actually made very genuine mistakes, or maybe it was they were judging the situation and what they had at the time. That's not a global statement. I'm trying to pick apart what happened in various cases. But what we have to do, I think, is get back trust. I think what's happened is a violation of trust.
How do you do that?
Well, as growing up as a boy, I could tell you the priest was the closest thing to God you were going to find. Part of my vocation was growing up in a very strong, vibrant Catholic parish. The example of the priests and the nuns drew me to my faith. So when you speak about, you know, as we lose Catholic schools, I think we're going to lose that adherence to the faith, that love for the faith, that bond which the Catholic school system was so successful in building up the body of Christ here. But I don't know how you can do it except, you know, one priest at a time. We've got to be faithful to our ministry. We've got to take our commitments and the sacrifices that we're called to live and live them in challenging times and show that we are worthy of your trust.
Agreed. And, you know, the shock when I discovered that there were these thousands of cases of priests who were being shuffled around from parishes to parishes, bishops not disciplining them, a false notion of forgiveness and all, I was shocked. And I said, I never knew this existed. I think that's what really hit most people. They didn't think it was this widespread, and they didn't think that the bishops wouldn't discipline them. That was good, that shock, because it forced the bishops to change their way of action. But ultimately, you know, the Vatican also got into the act, and they put new laws in, and they said to bishops, you've got to be more serious. If we stop having headlines of priests being arrested, I think the people's trust is going to come back. But in the meantime, we also have to say, look, who goes to the seminary? How are they being trained? The Vatican's been very insistent on that. Priests have to be psychologically healthy. They have to have the right kind of anthropology, view of the world, their fellow man. They have to understand what it means to be a celibate. But they also have to understand what their mission is. Their mission is to serve Jesus Christ, not themselves. And if they fall into perversions, the solution to that is you have to be removed. You know, this is not a club for people who we're going to just look at and say, all right, whatever you did, sorry, don't do it again. That's what happened in the past. Frustrating.
Let me propose something which is addresses at least some of the issues, whether it's realistic, plausible or not. In the Bronx, it's strange, but during the summer, you see a lot of young men who are in their early 20s walking around white shirts and ties in twos. They're Mormons, and they're doing their service, their mission work. One of the difficulties we know, we don't have enough contact between priests and other young people. And I think it would be great to have a parish volunteer service. So kids who graduate from college, we have a lot of empty convents. We invite them for a year or two to come and live in a convent and help the parish, do different things in the parish. Not that they become religious or anything like that, but that they understand the parish, they get to know the priests and the other ones in the parish, and they understand the problems of the parish. Most people have no idea how a parish functions, and the number of things, of religious, good, fabulous activities that they, as lay people, can be involved in and help priests with and help nuns with. We need more contact. We need more contact with the priests and lay people, and also nuns and lay people.
Let me ask, I'll give you all a softball before we go here. Why did you become a priest? and I'd like a good story here, not some opus, okay? But the real reason why you said, all right, I'm going to take a not easy life, and why, beyond faith, you reasonably think the church can come back to where it was.
Well, I'm a Jesuit. I went to Xavier High School in New York City. There were lots of young Jesuits there who were called scholastics. And I also had an uncle who was a Jesuit priest. So that's and also one of 12 children. So all of that made it, in one sense, easy. But I really want to do something special for the church. I wanted to develop a relationship with Jesus, which, thank God, I had through my parish church and really through devotion to the Eucharist. And that was built upon at Xavier, but I mean, it was always in the parish church. And at one point in my studies, I thought I couldn't become a priest because I didn't know what I could say, I preach and things. Well, luckily that was all solved in theology. But I mean, I would say it came out of the family, out of the parish, and my high school experience.
And why do you think we sit down here 10 years from now, the church will be in a better position than it is now?
Well, I'm going to go back to something I said at the beginning. I think the Holy Spirit regularly draws young men and women to service in the church. I can't believe that there aren't thousands of young women out there who would want to serve the church. And if they can find the right group, they will be there to serve. And I put a lot of faith in the sisters and the women, the dedicated women. It's the path by which the whole church grows. And I think there's good reason to believe that over the next 10 to 20 years, not over the next 2 to 3 years, over the next 10 to 20 years, that will rebound.
Father Mark, same reason why you put a collar on, and tell me why 10 years from now we have a better conversation we have now.
Well, I can resonate with a lot of things Father said there about growing up in a parish, feeling a certain affinity for the faith. My life as a family life was parish-centered. We did everything in the parish, not just on Sunday, but whether it was in the school, bingo, devotions, parish life, youth.
CYO.
Everything, everything. So that forms your vision, your view of the world, right? So, and I always felt to be a priest was the best thing that I could do with my life. Certain identity, a certain draw within the heart, and certainly, ultimately on the Eucharist. The priest is the one who gives us our Lord under the forms of bread and wine. Only the priest can do that. And the priest, without the Eucharist, there's no church. The mystical body of Christ, we're bound together in the sacrament of the Holy Eucharist. And so for me, there was that sacramental charism, as well as I told you a little about Cardinal O'Connor, Mother Teresa, Pope John Paul. I saw them as visionaries who spoke to what life is really all about. We get caught up in a lot of secular fog today, and young people especially. To move right into your second question, what do I think that we're going to be better off? Because we can give what no one else can. We can give values, a certain view of life, direction, and certainly the grace of Jesus Christ, which brings, peace to the heart. Only the church can do that. And I believe that there's a hunger out there, that once we've kind of satiated ourselves on, secular chocolates and sweets, where there's something deeper. St. Augustine, you made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. And so that hunger of the soul, only the gospel of Christ can address. And the church is the presence of Christ in the world. So I believe that's why we're going to succeed.
Well, I'll tell you, I was inspired by the college chaplain where I went. It was a secular college, and we had a very vibrant Newman Center, they were called. And it was not just him, but also the other fellow students who taught me in a new way, which I'd always known from my family and my parish and my school, that Christianity is the most important thing in the world. Now the question is, where was I going to fit in? And at a certain point I said, well, I think the lawyer plans are going to be put aside, which is my idea, and serve Christ full-time as a priest. As regards the second question, I think the church always has a clientele in waiting, because everybody has a question mark, what happens when I die?
Yeah.
And we're the only institution that guarantees 100% that we know the correct answer. And the reason we do that is because we believe that God gave it to us. Now, if we can convince other people of that, all to the good. Statistically, it's going to take a long time. I think Father Pitterett's right, 20, 30, 40 years. The devastation of the 60s cultural revolution, which hits the church, plus the general secularization of American society. It's not only Catholicism that's experiencing that, Judaism, Protestantism. The counter to that, though, I think, is new immigrants who come from the third world are naturally more religious often than we are here. And for those who are Catholic, I think they're going to bring new vibrancy. There's a big challenge coming from the Far East, Chinese immigration. Christianity is very vibrant over there. How will we greet them? We have Korean Catholics, most exemplary Catholics you can find in the area in many ways. So I have hopes, but I'm also not going to say statistically we're going to be better than we were in 1960, 20 years from now. It could be a long time before we get back to that kind of statistical preview.
Well, one thing at least I think, hopefully we agree, is more open conversations where there's an engagement about what's working, what's not, and where we go from here, I think, are at least a good step forward. Fathers, thank you all very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard.